All right, so hi everybody. You've been hearing me all day. So I'm Tom Beebe. I'm with xDB Systems. I'm also the president of the IUG, president of the WAG. I got a little bit of investment in Informix. I also, more importantly, feel very strongly about the product and about the user community around it. So I appreciate you all being on today. I appreciate listening to me go on about encryption. Um, so little bit about the talk. Um, Encryption is something that has become very important to me, both seeing the way the world is moving, as well as seeing what business culture has been changing, as well as regulatory changes. It's become much more apparent that a lot of people have Informix systems that have been absolutely rock solid, both the database server as well as the application layer around it for a long time. And a lot of the things that are sitting out there have been the same way for a number of years, and modern security was not built into the original design. So you may have seen some of my prior presentations on specific encryption elements. I want to do this one to do a higher level overview of the different ways that Informix allows encryption, because there may be some things that you haven't looked at before, or things that are just coming up now that you need to go point to your, CTO and go, hey, we need to implement this. So I want to do kind of a high level overview of the different ways. Hopefully this will be useful. There we go. So why is it a big deal? So I did a little research trying to go through IBM's white papers on this. The average cost of a data breach is $4.4 million. Um, if you're working for NVIDIA right now, that's probably a drop in the bucket. If you're working for almost anybody else, that's a good amount of money. And that's the average cost, depending on where you're at and what exactly got released. Uh, could be significantly more. And with us being the folks running the databases, or at least touching the databases for our wonderful application folks, we tend to be the system that is the biggest target in a lot of cases for attacks. We've got the juiciest morsels of information that they want to get after, so we're kind of a big deal. Um, you know, Bad faith actors are getting inside. Take your pick on any uh news article about it. It's always something else, whether it is IoT devices where the smart thermostat is being used to attack, or your routers are being used to jump through, or Frank from accounting just got his computer hacked. Whatever, people are getting inside more than they ever been, as well as all with the eternal problem of insiders doing things they're not supposed to. Data flowing unencrypted is just a gold mine for hackers. A lot of places, especially folks that are moving to the cloud, aren't necessarily thinking about if they just open up Informix, true with any database, to the cloud, you're probably not sending the data from here to there encrypted. It may just be going in plain text. Same thing with backup systems. They're being more and more targeted. If somebody's able to read your entire backup, great, you just gave them all your data. And the biggest thing, and I shouldn't say the biggest thing, but one of the big things right now is auditors get really, really cross about this. Very frequently does your database, and this is across the board, become one of the red flags for your auditors. Them coming back going, you need to fix it. And it looks far better if you're a CTO or a DBA, being able to get, check off your database systems from your auditors well in advance rather than need to do mitigation after the fact. So we know upper management, we know they're focused on whatever the latest IT trend is. So we're going to look at security investment with Informix, which everything we're going to talk about today is free with the product. So as far as actual software cost goes, you're not nothing I'm going to tell you today is going to cost you extra money. Infrastructure and man hours, different matter. So a couple of pieces of terminology we're going to use throughout. A key store is a small file-based database of certificates. This is basically a file on the system, or it could be remote, that has a list of keys that are known to the system, both potentially its own keys as well as keys to systems that connecting outside. Yeah, every time your web browser has one, a lot of times it'll be external, but it's got its own key store. Windows has its own. You just don't normally see them. Informix has its own key store. We'll be using several places. Second thing we use is called a stash file. This is a please keep it protected file that will actually have the password to decrypt the key store. You can decrypt the key store with your own set password, like you would uh, unencrypt or log into anything else. But the stash file allows you to automate it with this, one strong file. But again, it is a weakness point. If somebody gets a hold of it, they can then get into your key store. And then the certificate itself is the public key information. So we'll talk a lot about public key infrastructure. I'm not going to get into the weeds exactly what that does, but there are two parts, the public and the private key. Public key will let you encrypt data and then send it to the server. The private key is the only thing that can decrypt the data. You cannot decrypt with the public key. So, how Informix protects? There are four things we're going to talk about here: encryption at rest, in transit, backing up with encryption, and encryption in the database itself. So, we start with encryption at rest. This was introduced in 12.10xc8. As we talked about earlier today, please get off of version 12. This will be supported, pretty much all of 14. It actually encrypts the database chunks. So it'll go through and then put all your data on disk into encrypted format. It means that if somebody is trying, your engine is offline and somebody is trying to actually read the DB spaces themselves, they're trying to like do a copy of your DB spaces, or they physically steal your server or your hard drives, which can be a real thing. They won't be able to do anything with it. It'll just be a bunch of encrypted gibberish for them. They won't be able to do anything else. Encryption at rest is also something that more and more, or more frequently, is becoming a audit requirement. So just be aware you may need to do it, if nothing else, to check off that box. It doesn't help a whole lot from a practical standpoint for this level if your engine's online and somebody gets remote access to actually do queries on the engine. But this is where all of this is going to be a stack where you put all the layers of protection in place and it'll protect you at different points. You also, a lot of operating systems or the SAN itself will actually have disk level encryption built into it, which tends to be easier to manage if your system handles it. And a lot of times it'll do things where it is specifically tuned to be as efficient as possible with that disk encryption. It may be better. If you're on Windows, the number of problems Windows has had with BitLocker, I don't know that I would trust that one. But for anything on the Unix side, the Linux side, tend to play pretty nice. And also a lot of places, the SAN itself may be able to, if you're using one, may be able to do the encryption at that level. It may be easier not to deal with it on the engine level, but it depends on your environment. I will also say that I have been to sites that the auditors required both the physical disks themselves through the SAN to be encrypted and to have software level encryption at rest. You certainly can do it, but you have to keep in mind you're now dealing with two layers of encryption and decryption, which is going to be a performance hit. You can either use the internal key store we'll talk about a fair amount, or you can also use an external key manager. Amazon has one, I believe IBM what does, but I could be wrong on that, where your keys are actually managed and stored in a cloud service. So you can have some extra security there where things are not on the box itself. So it's very flexible. It gives you lots of options. Um, so just showing you what it actually looks like. So this is our onstat-d. We have all seen this 1,000 times. And the flags are what they have been for years. So we got our temp spaces. So the flags in the middle, are normal flags. Nothing special. So to create a new stash file, we're going to use the onKstore command to actually create the file. We're going to tell it what cipher to use, which the AES, I think it does 128, 196, or 192 and 256, depending on what level of encryption you need to hit. It'll actually create it automatically in the Informix Etsy directory. And then in the onconfig itself, we need to add this disk encryption. So this is where we tell it what the key store name is going to be and what cipher to use. And then we do have to restart the engine at this point to pick it up. At least the last time I checked, you cannot dynamically change this. So here's the thing, though. We may have encrypted it, but we now have the key store and the stash file sitting on the server. Keep that in mind. That stash file has to be protected, or the encryption at rest does you very little good. So if the stash file is in Informix or etc, when you bounce the engine, everything will come up other than the note in the online log. It'll look exactly normal. If the files are not there, the engine will not come up. This is actually a good security mechanism because it means that a bad faith actor could not bring the engine online without the stash file. And it also means the engine won't come online in some kind of inconsistent state. The files, the stash file and the key store are only used for the encryption at rest when the engine comes online. It reads into memory and goes from there. So what a lot of places will do, will keep the keys, at least the stash file, off the server itself and have part of their startup process copy the file over from a secured location, start it up, and then remove the file back out. So the only time the stash file is there is during startup. So a bad faith actor that got access to it would not be able to pull your stash file. So encrypting the engine, we've brought it back up. You'll see notes about it in the logs. Nothing is encrypted at this point. DB space are exactly like they were before you bounce the engine. You will then need to do a backup and a physical restore. And there's a new flag for -encrypt to actually encrypt the spaces. And what you'll see is after you've encrypted them, so this is where you do an on tape, you do your backup. Probably all seen this a lot of times. We do a restore for the physical level restore. We pass the encrypt parameter. And now when the engine is restored, we're back online. You notice in the flags that you now have BAE. The E is encrypted. So now these spaces are now encrypted on disk. We're done. End of story. You got it encrypted. Other than the backup restore time, this does not take a lot of effort, not a lot of work. It's much more about figuring how you're handling your stash file and figuring the outage window for the backup and restore. Not that hard to do, not that hard to manage. And the applications will see these totally normally. This doesn't change anything with how anything connects to it. It is purely how the engine reads data from the system. So the next thing is my network secure, right? We trust it, right? 100%? I don't think so. So encryption at transit. This is actually, if you take nothing else from this talk, please take this. I see so many Informix sites that are not using encryption in transit. And whether the data is going, one office over, one building over, across the whole internet, there's going to be hops there. There's going to be systems that will be handling that traffic, whether it's the routers or the switches or middle tier or whatever else. The problem is, again, Informix has been so stable and rock solid, that the SQL and how it handles the TCP connections has not changed in well over 20 years, fundamentally. And so a lot of people implemented this before encryption was, I don't want to say viable, but before they were thinking about it. And so they've never changed it since because it just works. But auditors will come in here and yell at you a lot if they find data going across, unencrypted. It's somewhat simple. I'm not going to say it's no effort. But the nice thing is it uses separate listeners and you can have it on different ports. So you can run the unencrypted TCP like you've always done, and then the encrypted. So you can do it so it is selective for which applications are using encrypted or unencrypted data. And it also makes migration a lot easier because you can migrate in part rather than need to just flip a switch for everything. It also has not that much overhead. We benchmarked this back with one of my clients back on version 11.7 on an older HP box, and we saw it had 40% overhead. I don't know if any of you tried implementing encryption back in the day and just said it wasn't worth it. It just decided to power itself off. That was fun. Um, but as I was saying, we tried a legacy system on 11.7 on HPUX, and it was about a 40% overhead. We tried the exact same test on a 14.10 box on a newer Linux system. This was not the most powerful thing in the world, and it was about a 3 to 4% hit. And in real world, it was with no noticeable bit for the end users. And so it has made it much more viable now. And again, if you're running real legacy, that may be different, but on most systems now, it is, you're not going to have much overhead. It'll work with any drivers greater than the client SDK 3.5 and pretty much any version of the JDBC driver. Be aware that if you're running something really legacy like ADODB, or you've got it something version locked to CSDK2, it's not going to work. You're going to have to figure out another solution. Please still do encrypt those data. So what it works, just for the list, it's ODBC, JDBC, your SQLI, should have been, yeah, SQLJ, DRDA if you're going against the universal driver, USLC, ER, HDR, pretty much everything except for the real legacy drivers. It does work with Connection Manager, so if you're using that, you absolutely can encrypt. Uh, then there is, why does it matter? If you're running unencrypted, somebody can sniff your password. They can look at your data. If you're running unencrypted, somebody could do DNS spoofing. A couple of different tactics there are poisoning and being able to make you connect to a server you didn't think you were connecting to. Man in the middle attacks are another one of those. If you've ever done your DBA security training, all these probably sound familiar, and it's true. Also, a lot of places, regulatory wise, you have to have this encrypted to pass compliance. And just, it's a good idea. So, again, nothing else, please take this. So, I pulled a Wireshark here. It's an open source tool. If you ever want to play around with it, it's free. Go check it out. But what you can do is you can go sniff your packets. This is something that I was running on my local system, but I could have run this on any system, this kind of utility on any system, including routers or packet inspecting firewalls between me and my target, and it would see the same thing. And what you notice here, what I've highlighted in blue, is I'm connecting as a user Bob, and I'm telling it the Informix password. And I'm able to read this all in plain text and then get all my session information. This stuff you don't want out there. Then, I run my queries and you can actually see the data coming back. So this is what the real thing is coming across in your TCP packets. It's the real data. You can go to look at this right now. So we're going to put it together. I'm going to go through a somewhat high level view. I've got links at the end to more detailed, but if you follow this or similar guides, take you about 15 minutes and you'll have it up and running. So we're going to configure our server. We're going to set up our SSL listener. We're going to create the key store. We're going to create the certificate. We're going to tell it to use con SSL CFG. This is the new file you put into the client SDK directory. Going to create our client key store, and then we're actually then going to add the certificate to it. It's 9 steps, and most of them will take you less than a minute. So we're going to get SSL set up, or we're going to wait and get dessert at lunch. This is not a big lift. So first thing, we want to make sure GSKit is installed for the server. Should install by default with you. If not, probably talk to whoever did the install if something got messed up. We're going to mess with onconfig, SQL hosts, and go from there. So on config changes, we're going to do 4 pieces. First one is our SSL key store label. This is a unique ID for what the server is going to be named as far as the SSL keys are concerned. The next thing is we're going to add a net type sock SSL. So just like we have our TCP net type, we're going to add one for the sock SSL. Same kind of parameters for what kind of initial uh, resources we want to give it. Obviously, this will depend on your server. Then we're going to add a VP class of encrypt. So just like we have all of our other VP classes, encryption needs one as well. If you're running other pieces that handle encryption in the system, it may already be running, but it's best to tune this. If you're running a really busy system, please give it a couple of processors. And then we're going to change our DB server aliases. And then we're going to add our new SSL listener. So this will be the SSL listener we define in SQL hosts. So SQL host, this will look real familiar where we give it that DB server alias name. And rather than OnSock TCP, we're using OnSock SSL. We give it our host name and our port number. 9089 is the default. As always, this can be whatever port you want it to be. Although some systems, if it's under 1024, they'll throw issues. Now we're going to build our key store. So we're going to run this in Informix /SSL. By default, this directory will be empty. If you're running a real legacy system, I think this is version 11, whatever, it'll be GSK 7. All of our modern systems, you should be using GSK 8. And all the utility is GSK 8, CAPIC, MDB. It's a mouthful, but it is how they've defined it for the GSK 8 commands. If it is a 64-bit system, which hopefully everyone is on at this point, there'll be a _64 at the end for the command. We're going to use IFX server for the example, so the key store label. And then the big thing here is the DB server name, whatever your primary Informix server name is, it must match the key store and stash file name, because that's how the engine knows when it comes online what files to source in to bring up the SSL listener. So they have to match up. Otherwise, you'll get errors about it, and the engine won't actually come online saying it can't find the file. So creating the key store, long command. I'm not going to go into all the flags, but we're creating the file, we're giving it a password, and we're telling it to stash. That password is important. Once the stash file is there, you don't actually need the password anymore. However, and this is true for any encryption you are doing that is important, take that password, write it down, put it in your company's safe deposit box, put it somewhere secured. Because if something happens to your stash file, I can't help you, IBM can't help you, none of your other vendors are going to be able to help you. Your data is now, whatever you're using that key store for, it is as it is, and you're not going to be able to access it. So please make sure you've got a backup of that. It's usually a good idea to back up the key store and the stash file anyway. Just, again, put them on a USB drive, put them in your safe deposit box. Then what we do is, so we've created our key store. We're now going to create our private public key pair, big long command. And then all of my slides will be available at the end. So don't feel you have to, pause this every time. Cut and paste works. We create our thing. One thing I'm going to note here is the expiration date on the certificate. Some locations may have specific requirements for the expiration date. It can only be 365 days. Some of the web's requirements are actually moving down to 45 days. However, with your database, it's going to encrypt initially for the connection, and then it's going to immediately create a one-time key. So even if an attacker gets access to your key store, it actually won't give them access to watching your data in transit. So especially if your Informix instance is only going to be used internally, like it only talks between it and the application server, you may want to give it more than 365 days. I have clients that use 10 years. I have clients that use more than that. It can maximum, I believe, is 20 years. So hopefully you're well retired before they have to deal with it. The one tricky piece is why I suggest that. I'm not going to say I suggest it on the record, even though I'm doing this on a web recording. It all depends on your environment. But if you've got it on a short term, you've got it on 1 year or even less than that, it means after a year, suddenly all your SSL connections are going to fail because the certificate will be expired. And then you'll have to go in, build a new certificate, and then deploy that to all the clients. Um, I mitigate that further on, but just keep that in mind that tends to be a lot of work and can be really problematic if some of your clients are in the field. So keep that in mind when you're deciding on your certificate, on your public-private key expiration date. Um, Next thing, we've got two files. So we've created our public key, private key pair. We now have our stash file and our KDB file. Newer versions are going to use .p12. It's just a different format that's a little more standard. Please make sure they are both only readable by the Informix user. If these are accessible to any of the other accounts on the server, it means that they've got access to your encryption. So next thing, we've got our server set. We've got those in place. We can bounce the engine and it'll bring up an SSL with the SSL listener. Now we need to set up our clients because without the clients, it's not going to do you a lot of good. So we create the key store the same way. And then what we're going to do is take our server and key store and actually export the certificate itself. So this is the public key from that key pair, and we're going to output it to a .cert file. We're then going to take that certificate, the .cert file, and actually import it into our client key store. So the next part is we have to create a new file for in our client SDK directory under etc/con/ssl.cfg. This file is not there by default. I actually need to put in an RFE for them to start putting a blank one. But it needs two lines, our key store file and our stash file. So this is the information to our client key store so that anytime our client SDK is trying to make an SSL connection, it knows where the files are it should look for. The engine needs the files to be an Informix stir/SSL DB server name, files. For the client key store, they can be anywhere you want them to be. So this tells it the complete path. They can be wherever you want. They can be named however you want. So again, you bring up the engine. Note that you cannot use onmode -uppercase P to start and stop SSL listeners. They only work at engine start time. So we can verify. The first thing is make sure our legacy TCP ports still work. We want to make sure we didn't break anything, we didn't put any bad stuff in. Then test out our SSL ports with our client. We've set up that client key store with. You should be able to connect with DB access the same way you always have. Just choose connect and then the server you want to connect to. And then we take that certificate file and build key stores that we put on whatever other clients we want to connect to. So key things we want to look for in the online log, forking one on SOC SSL listener. So it'll tell you if it works or not. And then on onsetg NTT, we'll actually see a SOC SSL listener. So this is how we validate that it's come up cleanly. For Windows, because this is one of the big questions. How do we set that up? So a couple extra steps than what we normally do. The first thing we want to do is create our client key store. So a lot of times I'll put this in a separate directory to make it a little easier to manage, but we obviously could put it in Informix /SSL. We could put it in our home directory, wherever we want to put it. Next thing is we have to actually create that con SSL file in the SDK directory. Note that on Windows, this is considered a protective directory, so you need to add it with the run as administrator. This is why I want them to start doing it by default, so the file's already there, but it's not currently. So same as on the Unix side, tell it the key store file and stash file path. Note, and I have not tested this on the latest version, but on the earlier versions of this, if you had spaces in the name, it would get confused sometimes. So in Windows, because the old school DOS way only allowed 8 characters, so each path with a space will have its own shortcut version. So like program files will be PRO, the first 6 characters ~1, and Informix, because it's Informix space client SDK, will have its own. You might need to do it depending on your version. I just flagged that as a gotcha. Key store, so we can take that same certificate file from our Linux server, copy it over, and then If the GSK8 directory is not already in your path, go ahead and add it in. We do the same GSK8 key store create and import server certificate, same as we did on Linux. Most of the time, I have found you can actually just take the key store you already created on Linux and just dump it over as long as the GSKit versions match. Um, when I've tested its work, your mileage may vary. It's always probably cleaner to do it, actually build it on your own system. So we create our ODBC. Power it off again. I'm gonna may have to RMA this. Um, but we build the new ODBC connection as we normally do. We just choose OnSock SSL for the listener type rather than OnSock TCP, and then we just connect it or test it. Um, OpenSSL is an option when you install the client SDK. It only works for the client SDK, not the engine, but this allows you to use the OpenSSL utility to actually do your key store management. So if you're doing a more advanced setup or you're just already using OpenSSL commands, it's an option. If you don't define it, it'll use GSKit as default. Um, you can install as many server certificates into the client key store as you want, so you can use that one key store to connect to all the servers you need to. Um, make sure that the client key store is readable by all of the users that need to access it. I've seen cases where it gets set up as read only or only accessible to the Informix user, which then doesn't help your end users. If you're doing server to server communication, you're doing cross server queries, things like that, make sure to add the client key stores onto the server key on the client key store certificate. Sorry, to hit the server certificate from the alternate servers into each other's server key store. They use the server key store when doing cross database queries. The other thing here is I highly recommend if you've got more than a couple of servers to manage, or you've got really complex client setups, using a certificate authority. That way, rather than having the GSKit handling all of it and everything being individual certificates for each server, you've got a single site that is handling everything, and it does not need to be online. Clients do not need to be able to reach it live. It's not like an online service to be able to authenticate with it. So you can set this up, give the clients the certificate authority information, and be done with it. I've got a whole write-up on this. I'm not going to go into details, but it makes managing multiple servers really much easier because you're dealing with a single certificate. Same if you've got a short expiration date, because you can then revoke and reissue certificates from the certificate authority, and you don't need to then send the new certificate key out to all the clients. They've already got the CA that they've trusted. Um, question is, can I use the same client certificate in multiple clients? Um, the client itself does not need a certificate. It just needs the whatever it's trusting, whether it is the server certificate specifically or the certificate authority certificate, one or the other or both. So that point, all of them can share. You can take the same client key store that knows all the servers and pass the exact same file around. A lot of times people, if they've got a thick client application, will bundle the client key store with it. So they just push it out along the exact same file out to all of the clients. Vicente, did that answer it? Okay. I'm assuming yes in
Sorry,
follow-up.
yes, sorry, I was mute.
Okay, great. Um, So again, if the certificate authority is of interest, um, check out my write-up on it. There's plenty of other information on how to do it out there. It just makes life much easier, and you can either there's plenty of services, including open source ones that'll run a Docker container to do your certificate authority. You can also do it entirely from the command line with the OpenSSL utility. It takes a little bit of work to get it set up. I had to go through some Red Hat documents on it, but once I got it there, it was great. I go in if I need to put a new certificate on. I've got a new server coming online. I just go in and tell it, all right, issue a key for this new server, set up the server with that new key, and bring it online. And now all of my clients can already talk to it. I don't have to touch the clients at all. So we've got our secured Informix server. We've got the disks encrypted. We've got the data encrypted in transit. Great. Now our backup server got compromised. Backup servers are one of the biggest targets right now because if you're able to pull a backup of a server, you've now got everything on there. And it's usually in a format that you don't care about permissions because you can mount that to a virtual box or however you want to with root permissions, and you've got everything on there. So they put a lot of work into allowing you to encrypt your backups. So we got a couple of different ways. The backup filter, a lot of you have hopefully used this. There's bar encryption, which is new. We get creative with STDIO or with S3. So backup filter. A lot of us have been using this a very long time and it still works. So the backup filter and restore filter you put them into the onconfig file. I believe you can also do them as an environment. And what it will do is run these commands during the backup and restore process. You can tell it either to tell it an application or a script or whatever else, however your admins want to do it. And it'll actually be run during the process of the backup. A common one for this is actually putting in compression and pass it through gzip or even pigz, and it will live compress your data as the backup is happening, so you don't have the overhead of having to then run another command on the end. It's however you want to handle it on the system. And you can use this for compression tools to actually pass it through and compress or encrypt the data, using an encryption tool as the backup is actually happening. And then you set up the restore filter to do the decryption. A lot of utilities out there that you can do this with the Unix ecosystem. I'm not going to go through any examples of that. You can, if you want to do that, lots of information out there. So the next one, and this is one of the newer and nicer ones. There's a new onconfig parameter in 14 for bar encryption. This is where we use the key store again. This is the one we created when we were doing encryption at rest, or we could have a separate one for it. Same thing with the cipher. And it uses that encryption key to anytime you're doing your backup or restores. So it makes it really nice if you want to just not have to think about it and it just encrypt automatically. Again, if you lose your stash, and the stash file needs to be there for this to work. So you may want this as a separate piece or script out your system so copies the stash file, runs the backup, and then gets rid of the stash file so it's not sitting around. It isn't depending on your environment on how you handle it. You can use an external key store for this, so you could actually store the keys in like an Amazon S3 cloud and automatically point them out there. There's information in the docs on how to do that. So some of you may be familiar with this. You can use a dash. So OnTape allows you to give it a specific device, and you can give that device STDIO. So if you're an old school Unix admin and you really love scripting stuff out, you can do this and just treat this as a pure pipe of data to anything you want. So you don't even have to use backup filter. You can just set up OnTape to do it this way and go through whatever encryption tool you want. Again, we're maybe moving past this, but it's certainly an option. It works. So the next one is PSM and working with the cloud. We used to be with it. Now we may not be with it anymore. Embrace it. It is your friend. So PSM. So this is the new storage manager. Some of you may be familiar with ISM from back in the day, which was slow and painful. PSM's the replacement, came in with version 12. It is so much better, so much more manageable. If you haven't played with it and you don't have a dedicated storage management system, I'd recommend spending a little time with it. It's easy to work with. It's very, very nice. One of the things I want to flag here is that you can use you give it in PSM directories or targets for where the backup's going, and you can give them priority so you can have multiple targets. One of the things that they introduced was allowing you to have a target of an S3 provider. And I mention this here because you can use S3 and actually have it encrypt the data inside of S3. So you treat it like a normal file going in, but S3 actually handles encrypting the data for you. You can also do local S3. There are ways to run your own S3 host locally in your environment. So you could do that and let your backup team handle encryption at that level. A lot of storage managers will have their own encryption put into place. The big thing to do this is, well, for one, if you're using anything on Amazon, make sure your accounts are secure. That's been a big issue for a while, is people leaving S3 buckets public to the world or their accounts aren't secure. So again, it is your data is as secure as your weakest point. But when you've encrypted, whatever method you use to encrypt your backup means if somebody gets your backup, it does them no good. It is sitting there as one giant file or set of files that are just gibberish to them. They can't do anything with it. So even if something were to happen, you got infiltrated, they took your backup server, they got access to whatever their system was, data's useless to them. Um, so it is another level and another auditor checkbox to hit, but highly recommend, if you aren't doing it already, encrypt your backups. Also, just plugging it here for security's sake, make sure you have offsite backups, um, not just for the case where your data center gets hit with a meteor, but it's also that ransomware is much more of a common thing now. And backup servers have become one of the biggest things that they will take over if given the opportunity. So a lot of cases, you get your server, gets attacked. They encrypt your whole server for the ransomware attack, and you go, okay, great. I'm not going to pay them $5 million. I'll go to the backups and just pull that, and we'll tell people to rerun the last 24 hours. And then you get there and find they've done the same thing to your backup system. Have an air gap backup somewhere. If you still have a tape drive around, occasionally copy your database to a tape, put it somewhere safe. Copy it to a USB drive, unplug that USB drive when not in service, have it be to some kind of cloud host that then shifts the file out. Just, it's one more level of security. You never want to be locked out where suddenly your data's gone. So we've got our backups encrypted now. Next on to the data in the engine. So this has been there a very long time. You're allowed to do column level encryption as well as encrypting just individual cells. This will work. I know it works in version 11. I don't know if this is supported in 10. I'm hoping no one here is still running version 9. And the password itself, this is all password based. You can either be supplied for the whole session, or you can supply it on the individual query for the particular row. It relies on the password being secure. And I don't just mean it being a long password, but it also end to end the password itself being secure. Because if somebody is able to find out that password from looking at the application, looking at the user, it's great. They've got access to everything in the system, and this is doing nothing. The big downside to this is you cannot index data that is encrypted. Maybe technically possible, does you no good, and will slow everything down. So keep in mind, if you're encrypting like social security number, you're not then going to be able to do a lookup by social security number on an index. You're going to have to decrypt all the data to search across it. So pros and cons using this. It's driver agnostic. We'll even use really old drivers. You can do it on a session level. So everything else with the application would be fairly normal other than the functions required. But it also means you can have multiple passwords in a single table. So you can have Jeff have access to these rows, and John have access to these rows, and Cindy have access to these rows. And each one is independently encrypted. It's not hard to implement. The biggest advantage for encrypting data in the engine is if you get an attacker that gets access to your Informix account, right now, even if you've got all the other layers of encryption, they can just go log into the engine and, export all the data, or, select across all the data or whatever else. This will prevent you from the DBA from seeing the data. It'll prevent attackers, that have DBA access from seeing the data. So For really sensitive data, this can be very helpful. In a lot of cases, also, if you're doing things like storing credit card numbers, please don't, or social security numbers, uh, having this encrypted, that's not what you're doing the query on. You're usually querying on the user ID or maybe the person's name. So you could index that data and then have this encrypted data be there as well. And it's going to add very little overhead in that case. So downside is it does use more space because it's storing a full encrypted value, not just the data. It requires the password actually being passed in at some point during the session. It is less efficient than application level encryption, and there are some data types that can't be encrypted. So some like the blob ones, some of the new data types can't. To actually run this, you give it the set encryption password. So this will be by session. Um, and you actually give it the password and you can give it a hint. So if you want to remind yourself which password this would, you can do that. And then use the encrypt TDES and then decrypt char functions around the field, and it will automatically read this password that's in your session to do it. Or you can pass the password when you're actually doing those functions as well. It's a separate parameter. So it's mostly standard SQL. You just have to wrap that particular field in the function to do it. Okay. Uh, so sorry, Vicente threw something in chat. I'm actually going to let you unmute if you want to. Okay.
Sorry, I don't want to interrupt you. It's
No, no,
just
no, please.
uh, the previous slide that another cons is that it requires to change your applications to use it. So you need to specific programming these commands inside your applications. So you cannot use in an existing application. I would like this to be like an automatic managed by the engine, but this is not. This is a new feature. There's this.
Yeah. Yeah. If this is something that you really wish to use or are currently using, this would be a good way to put in a request for enhancement on for the features you want. Um, this is something they have not changed in a long time. And as such, I don't know that I could recommend it for all cases because, as Sente said, you need a special function. So you do have to adjust your SQL for it. And it does have a fair amount of drawbacks. Um, what I actually recommend in most cases is let your application folks do it. Manage your encryption on the application level and actually store your data encrypted already before it hits the engine. That way, all of the modern tools to encrypt data, using OAuth, using all sorts of, remote key management tools, using any kind of functionality out there on the application level, as well as handling integration with Windows Domain or any other things, allows you to do that and let the developers handle it, and you just handle data. Because if they're storing the data encrypted, you definitely as a DBA can't read it. So and you can have it if they get creative with what they pass, you may be able to do a level of indexing. So that really today, that's what I'd recommend if you're implementing this from scratch is have your application do it. But if you need to use it, if your auditors come back and go, yeah, we need to have this field done, it doesn't take a lot of work. You do have to modify the application for the SQL change, but there's not a lot else to it. Yeah, it is there if you wish to use it. I would love to see them move to some modern pieces. I don't know that it is on the roadmap. So, wrap up. So, this is a high level review. I mean, I know I gave examples and some basic how to guides. There's a lot more out there depending on your environment that you may want to look at. I would not just take my guides exactly as is, implement it, and call it a day. I would use this as a starting point to then look at the flags to see if there are things that are specific to your environment that might be helpful, or things that you specifically need to for whatever your regulatory compliance is. But hopefully this kind of goes, oh, hey, this thing is there. Oh, hey, I have been meaning to play with this. hopefully this is useful, or you could hand this off to your CTO and go, hey, this is why you need to give me 3 more people for the next month to go in and change our application or look at changing our database and do the testing for it, because we need to implement this before the auditors come in, Q2. So security is one of those jobs that often is overlooked. It's only noticed when something goes wrong, but it's critical. And you don't want it going wrong. You want to sleep better at night. Um, it again, attacks get more common and sophisticated than they really are. We secure what we can. Hopefully, you're not running security for everything in your environment. Hopefully, you have teams dedicated to that. But we secure what we can, how we can, to do a reasonable level. Um, Again, if a end user that has access to data is compromised and effectively a hacker is looking over their shoulder, there's not a lot you can do about that. But you can go back and go, well, we did everything we could do. And we have done everything we can do so that if somebody gets onto the system, they're not able to hurt us as badly as it can. I'm not going to say there is no way. I'm not going to say if somebody's got root that they couldn't get real creative with uh, actually sniffing memory, things like that. It exists. If data can get served out to clients, there are ways that somebody that was very sophisticated could do it. But these are the reasonable and the industry standards ways to encrypt the data on a database and on the system. Um, Everything is a layered stack of security. If your operating system is weak, you lose most of it there. If your clients are weak and easy to get broken into, you've lost that. It's the weakest link on the chain, and databases should not be the weakest link. We are one of the most critical parts, and it's not that much time and effort to be able to make your system stronger if you're not already. Um, Please remember that legacy Informix systems are out there, that one accounting system that's been running since 1995, take a look at it. The other thing here is there are outside tools you can do for specifically encryption in transit. You can always set up a VPN um, and run your data across that. Even if you're in a situation that you can't do on SOC SSL, if you got an end-to-end VPN, your data is encrypted the whole way, or any number of encrypted tunnels. You can get it real creative with port forwarding on SSH. There are ways to encrypt your data even if it's outside of Informix. So it all depends on your environment. So we all pass an audit. That's the important thing. Not the only important thing, but it's the important thing as far as metrics go. So I do want to also flag there's a bug in GSKit, specifically with XC10 and XC11 with 14. It ships with GSKit 8.0.55.31. This does not correctly create key stores. You will find that when using a client key store created on that version, it will have problems connecting to certain versions of the Informix server. I haven't gone extensive testing of this, but please go up to XC12. There's also all kinds of other fixes in XC12 that'll give you the later GSKit. So just be aware if you start implementing SSL, make sure to be on a newer version when doing this. You can also independently upgrade GSKit outside of the engine. The engine will actually have a directory after it's installed, which is /GSKit, that will actually have the installer for GSKit. So if you need to manually do it or manually upgrade it, the files are there to you. So some resources, a lot of these are from me, but not exclusively. So again, got the in transit, webcast. I've got which I've also done a couple of tech talks on. Uh, I did a write-up on actually setting up an external certificate authority. So if that's something of interest to you, I tried to do step-by-step with that. Guide, please, if you're running Informix HQ, enable SSL on that. Uh, there's a Audit group has a really good write-up for actually setting up encryption at rest, encrypting backups. And IBM has a good one for using external key stores. So if you want to use a cloud key store or otherwise, they've got a nice write-up on that. Again, slides will be out there. Please don't feel you have to write down a long URL. Um, So, going to open up to questions at this point.
Tom, I don't remember if you mentioned it, but the engine uses GSKit, but the clients can use either GSKit or SSL.
Yeah, and note with that, it is you may have noticed it prompting with after version, I want to say it's 14.1 XC4. It'll actually prompt you when you install the client SDK. Do you want to install this with GSKit or OpenSSL? So when you make that choice, it'll determine whether you're using the GSKit commands or the OpenSSL commands to create the key store. So thank you for flagging that. Anyone have anything else? All right. Well, thank you all very much for this. I'm going to bear with me a second. I'm going to swap slide decks. I got a couple of tail ones here. So, and again, I'm Tom Beebe, Tom at xDB Systems. Please let us, feel free to reach out if you have follow-up questions, or also because I tend to do a lot of encryption talks. If there's anything you feel I got wrong or feel I should include, please let me know. So I know a lot. I don't know everything yet.
Thanks,
Gonna,
Tom.
yep. All
Thank
right,
you very much.
Sharon, one more thing. Uh, so I'm looking for my slide deck on that. Bear with me 2 seconds here. Go back to my WAG slide deck. There we go. Uh, So a couple other quick end of meeting notes. We do our Informix Tech Talks. We got one, Mark Jameson, who's back working heavily with Informix with IBM, is giving us a really deep topic on understanding indexes on January 15th. We normally do the third Thursday of the month. That just happened to be earlier on January. We are always looking for additional speakers to give tech talks. We do these once a month. This is for the user group. Nobody's getting paid. We are all doing this because we love the product, we love the user group, we love the community, and we want to get back to it. It is both, it looks good on, resume, or if you're part of the champion program or anything else, but on a more practical level, it is sharing what you have learned or what you know with the community. And it could be a technical deep dive on something, but it could also be hey, here's something we do with our system. Here is something I have learned as a DBA. Here is, a solution we have built using Informix to show off what it can do and how it is being used. I'm a consultant. Almost every site that I go to, I learn something new. Somebody is doing something creative or using some tool I was unaware of or something else. So if you've got something you're willing to talk about, or you're just curious, if you have never presented before and go, that looks kind of interesting, or I find a lot of people find this thing that I do very interesting, feel free to write us, specifically Art or Rhonda. In particular are kind of the leads on this. And not either you can let us know, hey, I'd love to do it, or you can also go, hey, I'm interested in this topic. I don't know how to put this together. I don't know how to start. We can help you with that. Or co-present with you. We have options, but we'd love to see more of the community come in and let us know what you're doing, share what you've learned, etc. Means a lot to us. Same thing with articles. We do our monthly insider newsletter. If you've got anything you'd like to put in there, whether it is something long, something short, we love community input there. We do still have badging for version 14. This is currently IAG sponsored. I shouldn't say IAG sponsored, IAG proctored. It is currently on hiatus briefly. We'll resume it back in Q1 of 2026. So if it is something where you're not yet 14 certified and you wish to be, feel free to drop us notes with email with questions. We've got information on the website. We'll start offering them again in Q1. It's 60 questions, takes about 90 minutes. Really, it takes quite a bit less than that. Um, so, Tech Exchange is coming up in 2026 in Atlanta. if you are interested in thinking you want to go, they're running a 50% off special right now if you do it before December 31st. Assuming IBM still wants us back, because I think last year in Florida went really well. IEG will be there. We'll have Informix content. So we'll have more information about our involvement and the event in general once we get it, which will hopefully be Q1, something like that. But if you want to go, register before December 31st. I don't think we're going to have IBM's going to go any cheaper on the price, but just want to put it out there. As always, we're the WAG, WIEG.org, IEG.org, information on the certification. Please let us know. We'll be doing another WAG meeting somewhere in 2026. If people, I also want to flag, if folks on here that are local to the DC area want to have an in-person meeting, let us know. We haven't had a lot of responses back so far on it, but if you really feel strongly that you want to do in person again, let us know. Otherwise, we'll just stick to virtual. So I think that is it. So thank you all so much for being on here. Thank you for the amazing presenters. Really appreciate all the work. I don't know that she was on earlier, but thank you, Rhonda, for all of the work you've done putting this together. And really appreciate it. And we'll see you in January.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
So, and the recordings will be up somewhere in the next few days onto the YouTube channel, and we'll cross-post from IEG and WAG sites.
Excellent.